It's a celebration of America's freedom. Welcome to the Mark Scaringi Show. The Mark Scaringi Show is your place for a weekly discussion on making America great again. The important political and legal issues of the day, a celebration of the Constitution, and traditional American values. Mark is a practicing attorney, a former senatorial candidate, a Donald J. Trump-endorsed delegate, and a defender of the Constitution. His goal? To put America first. And now, celebrating America's freedoms, here's attorney Mark Scaringi.
Well, good afternoon and welcome to the Mark Scaringi Show. This is your place on the dial for constitutional conservatism. This is where we talk about the important political and legal issues of the day from the perspective of putting America first. And thanks for tuning in on WHP 580 AM and iHeartRadio and News Talk 104.1. And happy 4th of July to all of you. If you'd like to watch prior podcasts of the show or take a look at some great merchandise, including our popular Right to Bear Arms muscle shirt and the We're Glad You're Our Neighbor, just please don't kill us yard signs and T-shirts, go to the MarkScaringiShow.com website. And for more political and legal news throughout the course of the week, don't forget to follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. Well, it is Independence Day, and last night, July 3rd, President Donald J. Trump stood before the majestic backdrop of Mount Rushmore and delivered a sterling tribute to America and some of America's greatest men, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Abraham Lincoln, and Theodore Roosevelt. And he got accolades by so many Americans who for so long have been waiting to hear a president of the United States speak so beautifully about our founding fathers, our greatest leaders and statesmen, and the principles of our founding and the values upon which this country stands. President Trump has been doing that since he started running for office back in 2015. But it's just so wonderful to hear those words of tribute to what America is all about from the leader of our nation on our most important day of the year, the Independence Day, the day that America was born, was created on July 4th, 1776. And, of course, there are naysayers about the president's remarks from our friends in the left-wing leftist media. The title to the New York Times article this morning describing the president's address reads this way: Trump uses Mount Rushmore speech to deliver divisive culture war message. Well, if the New York Times hated the speech, then you know it must have been a great one. And I think last night's speech was perhaps one of the president's greatest. He clearly identified what is wrong in America today. He said, quote, "Our nation is witnessing a merciless campaign to wipe out our history, defame our heroes, erase our values, and indoctrinate our children. Angry mobs are trying to tear down statues of our founders, deface our most sacred memorials, and unleash a wave of violent crime in our cities." And then the president declared not only where he stands in the cultural war that has engulfed our nation, but that he will take up the fight to defend America. He announced, "I'm here as your president to proclaim before the country and before the world, this monument will never be desecrated. These heroes will never be defamed. Their legacy will never, ever be destroyed. Their achievements will never be forgotten. And Mount Rushmore will stand forever as an eternal tribute to our forefathers and to our freedom." Well, those were strong words indeed, uttered in defense of America's forefathers, all great men who made America into the greatest nation on earth. These great men, Washington, Jefferson, Lincoln, Roosevelt, whose visages are chiseled, literally, the stone of that great mountainous monument. They founded our nation. They expanded it westward to achieve our manifest destiny. They freed the slaves, preserved the Union, and proudly announced the arrival of America as a world power. Their ideals, virtues, values, and accomplishments define who we are as the American people. We are, or at least we are supposed to be, proud, brave, bold, free, and independent. Not since Ronald Reagan have we had a president who was brave enough to eschew political correctness and instead champion the real America, what America is really all about. Not to condemn with hackneyed and distorted views what the left wing would like you to believe America is all about, but to celebrate the truth of the founding of our country, that on July 4th in 1776, with the Declaration of Independence, and later the War for Independence that was successfully prosecuted and led to the ultimate victory by George Washington, that was the greatest act in the history of the world, where you had a free people come together to decide that they were going to govern themselves and they were going to free themselves from a tyrannical government, the Empire of Great Britain, the British Empire. And these founding fathers, they did sacrifice their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor. They had everything at stake, and they pushed off from the British Empire, which did not take it lightly. They're standing down, of course, and fought a multi-year-long war to establish the independence of our country. And then we got together, our forefathers, that is, and established a constitution, established a government by the consent of the governed. No king, no despot, no dictator. This was an anomaly in the history of the world. It was an aberration. We established a republic. This is the greatness of America that is maligned by all of the major institutions in our country today, sadly. But thankfully, we have a president who is willing to stand up for America and for our principles and for what we're all about. And the president talked in this speech before the beautiful, majestic Mount Rushmore monument. He said, "Angry mobs who are trying to tear down statues of our founders, deface our most sacred memorials, and unleash a wave of violent crime in our cities." Well, who are these people? The president explained that many of these people have no idea why they're doing this, but some know what they're doing. They think the American people are weak and soft and submissive, but no, the American people are strong and proud, and they will not allow our country and all of its values, history, and culture to be taken from them. Those, again, were the words of the President of the United States last night at Mount Rushmore. But the President's describing these angry mobs in contradistinction to the American people. He talks about the mobs, and then he talks about the American people. But the angry mobs are the American people. They are us, regrettably. They're not an invading army from a foreign nation that has defeated our armed forces and is occupying our country and defacing and taking down our monuments and memorials. No, the angry mobs are Americans. They're the American people. More particularly, they are liberal extremist Americans who are attempting to dismantle and tear down our culture, history, and tradition. So, this is not an outside invasion by a hostile foreign power. This is much more dangerous, much more insidious. This is a revolution from within by a large group of Americans who are hostile to America. This is a cultural revolution. Thankfully, they're not using guns yet, although they're getting close. We'll talk more about the president's Independence Day speech in front of the Mount Rushmore monument when we return from this brief commercial break. You're listening to The Mark Scarinci Show.
Now, more of Mark Scaringi on News Radio WHP 580.
And welcome back to the Mark Scaringi Show, your place on the dial for constitutional conservatism on this, the Independence Day weekend celebration. Today is July 4th. Our nation was born on this day in 1776. It was not born, as the New York Times would tell you, in 1619. That's the date that the New York Times tells you that we had the introduction of slaves in the Jamestown colony back in Virginia in 1619. No, America was born on July 4th, 1776, in an act of defiance against a tyrannical king. And we declared our independence and won our independence through the heroic efforts of the father of our country, George Washington. Regrettably, statues of Washington are being desecrated in cities across the country by these left-wing liberal extremists who want to tear down the great men who founded our country and destroy their history and their legacy because of some of the flaws of these men, flaws that are left-wing extremist, radical, violent looters and rioters have determined to be so overwhelming that we have to remove the existence, the legacy, the history of men like George Washington and Thomas Jefferson because they once owned slaves. Our President Donald J. Trump, will not have that and is pushing and fighting back. And his speech yesterday on July 3rd in front of the majestic monument at Mount Rushmore was a beautiful rhetorical splendor about the majesty of the American experiment and the greatness of the men who founded and built this country. And that's the topic for today's show here on the Mark Scaringi Show. And you're welcome to call in 717-540-0580. That's 717-540-0580. And we have some callers on the line already. John from East Berlin, you're on the Mark Scaringi Show.
Hey, Mark. God bless America. Happy 4th. God bless you. God bless President Trump. Referring to what's been going on, especially with all the rioters and the protesters that are alleged to be protesters, my buddy George and I talk a lot about this, and along with a bunch of other people. And one of the things that is most frustrating about this is there's kind of a mutiny going on with the American citizens. I mean, I would venture to guess that most of us do not agree, and I would say a great majority of us do not agree with Antifa and Black Lives Matter, and you know, this stuff is all being falsely labeled. I don't think we're a racist country at all, but and again, the liberal media has a lot to do with, putting this out there. And the trouble with it is when the citizens that really aren't as involved or really don't care as much, they embrace what comes off the media as gospel. And I think we're being compelled as a society right now to not just take what comes out of the media's mouth at face value. There's very few of elements of the media that are actually truthful. So we don't seek the truth. That's the first problem. We don't embrace the truth. And the unfortunate thing, there's a lot of lukewarm Americans, and I'll say the Republican Party. I'm furiously upset with a lot of Republicans in what they could be doing, and I'm not sitting in those chairs, but it just seems publicly, and maybe the media is kind of quashing this, where they don't say, hey, we got Joe Blow, good Republican, we got this guy doing this. I know that's not going to be broadcast. But I think our paradigms and mindsets have to change as a society and not embrace this stuff as truth. And that's why we're being led astray. I mean, we're being led like lambs to the slaughter. And I hope it doesn't get to that. But, things keep heating up. But what we got to do is start telling the truth, and we got to start embracing the truth and then acting upon what is true. The same way with the coronavirus. All that is just embellished. It's overstated. There's so many things that are taken out of context, and if a person cares enough, you can find out all of the, there's other alternatives to these scenarios. That's my feelings on it in general. So
very good, John from East Berlin. I appreciate hearing your views. You talked about mutiny, and I think you're exactly right that this is a cultural revolution,
right,
by Americans who are engaging in a mutiny. They despise the founding fathers and the virtues and the principles and the character of those men and what they stood for, and it's very dangerous. You talk about we're like lambs being led to the slaughter, and it is very scary. You look at the cultural revolutions that have occurred throughout the history of the world, and look at the French Revolution in 1789. Look at the Bolshevik Revolution in 1917, the Maoist Revolution in the 1950s. Look at the Khmer Rouge and Pol Pot in the 70s. Those were all extreme left-wing liberal. They became Marxist, Leninist revolutions, and they led to the destruction and the killing and the murder of millions of people who were perceived by those revolutionaries to be enemies of the people, so to speak.
Yes.
And we Americans, for some reason, we think we're immune from history. We are not. We are not immune from the reality of history, in that these cultural revolutions, they have occurred throughout the history of the world in just about every country that's ever existed. And so we have to be very cognizant of that. And so
how well is history being taught in the schools right now? Even the higher institutions of learning, but let's say, grade school, elementary school, high school, I think that has an impact on it, because I don't think that's being taught in the curriculum.
Well, what in my view, the left wing took over the colleges and universities 40 years ago. And in more recent decades, they've taken over our primary and secondary public schools. So our kids are learning this kind of Marxist-Leninist, extreme left-wing approach or philosophy or worldview in our schools. So this is the big problem here, that our major institutions, from the academy to the media to Hollywood, and now it's even corporate America, our government, they are all occupied, operated, and controlled by the left wing. The people who believe in this Marxist-Leninist cultural revolution, these are the people who are teaching our children. And so your children will come home from public school and they'll regale you with how racist and sexist and Islamophobic and homophobic American culture is. So we have there's so much stacked against us, because the institutions are controlled by these people who you've identified as mutinous against the founding of our country.
Right. And we have the George Soroses of the world that aren't helping matters either.
Well, and you talked about Republicans and how concerned you were that they're not putting up the fight, and you're exactly right. They never have. And the last Republican we had who actually stood up for real American values and virtues in our history was Ronald Reagan.
Yeah.
Now we have Donald Trump, but remember what the Republican Party tried to do to him. In 2015, 2016, they tried to get rid of him. Because he stands for what is true about America, and he wants to put America first and restore our traditional American values, and that is anathema to most of the Republican establishment that could care less about what happens to our culture. All they're concerned about is lower taxes and less regulation, no tariffs, and the ability to make money all over the world. That's their primary interest. And so,
well, I wonder if those said Republicans wouldn't get a paycheck to do what they do. I wonder how they'd feel about it then.
they'd have a very
you know what I mean?
I do, yeah, a very different point of view. You're exactly right. Hey, John, I gotta get to a commercial break.
Okay. Hey, thanks, Mark.
You're my pleasure, and very interesting perspective. That was John from East Berlin, talking, really putting the nail on the head, so to speak, of the problem that is confronting our country today. We have a mutiny going on by a large number of Americans, the left, that is not just in the streets, but they control the institutions that essentially govern our society. They're in control of Hollywood. They're in control of the media. They're in control of the government, with the exception of the president. He's kind of the lone wolf, as he's described himself. They're in control of the academy, of colleges and universities. They're in control of our public schools, and they are now flexing their muscles. So they're in our institutions, and they're in the streets now, rioting and protesting across the country, using the George Floyd matter as justification for assaulting the principles and the values of the United States of America. And the Republican Party will quickly and easily fall down on its knees and will do nothing to stop this cultural revolution. Thankfully, we have one man who won't fall down to his knees, and who will stand up and defend America, defend our history, our traditions, our culture, and that's Donald J. Trump. And he did, I think, a beautiful job yesterday evening in South Dakota, where we'll talk more about that. I've got to take a brief commercial break, so stay with us. We'll be back right after this. You're listening to the Mark Scarinci Show.
Let's get back to the Mark Scarinci Show on News Radio WHP 580.
And welcome back to the Mark Scarinci Show. This is your place on the dial for constitutional conservatism, and this is where we talk about the important political and legal issues of the day from the perspective of putting America first. We're talking about President Donald J. Trump's speech at Mount Rushmore yesterday evening. Now, I know he is due to be addressing the nation again today in Washington, D.C., with the 4th of July celebration in our nation's capital. But we're talking about his speech last night and how I think he did a marvelous job kind of doing the job that our institutional leaders have failed to do for so long. And it's more than just failing to do. It's that so many leaders in our institutions, from our colleges and universities to our public schools, the media, and then crazily even corporate America and even sporting teams, athletic teams, have all embraced this left-wing progressive ideology that America is inherently and endemically evil and racist, sexist, and whatever other ist you want to put on that long list of the ists and the isms that America apparently is. But we have a president who's pushing back, who's standing up for us. And we're talking about his speech last night. In one part, and you're welcome to call in, 717-540-0580. That's 717-540-0580. And let me know what you think about the president's address last night, about our Independence Day holiday, about the cultural revolution that is going on in our country today. A bad one, not a good one. Again, 717-540-0580.
Last night, he in his speech, he said, in our schools, our newsrooms, even our corporate boardrooms, there is a new far-left fascism that demands absolute allegiance. If you do not speak its language, perform its rituals, recite its mantras, and follow its commandments, then you will be censored, banished, blacklisted, persecuted, and punished. It's not going to happen to us, end quote, from President Trump. Now, the New York Times condemns this characterization. Why? Well, because the president is correctly describing the media as the fascists that they are. The president correctly identifies the Orwellian world in which we live today. Let's just take one example. The left requires us to say Black Lives Matter and calls us racist if we refuse to say it. If we say all lives matter, we are condemned as a racist. This is what the president is talking about. It's a mantra, Black Lives Matter, that we must utter. And if we don't, we're racist. This is the fascism that the president is correctly diagnosing that has infected the major institutions and the people who run them in our country. In fact, if you utter the phrase "all lives matter," you could lose your job. The Sacramento Kings play-by-play announcer Grant Napier, he was fired for tweeting this, quote, "All lives matter, every single one," end quote. That's the tweet. He tweeted, "All lives matter, every single one." What happened to this play-by-play announcer for the Sacramento Kings? Fired. Terminated. Listen to what his employer, the Bonneville International Corporation, wrote about its termination of his employment. Here's what they wrote. His recent comments about the Black Lives Matter movement do not reflect the views or values of Bonneville International Corporation. The timing of Grant's tweet was particularly insensitive. After reviewing the matter carefully, they reviewed the matter carefully. It's one tweet. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 words. All lives matter, every single one. So they reviewed that matter very carefully. They did an in-depth examination into those 6 words, and they concluded that it was just simply insensitive. The timing was insensitive, and it didn't reflect their views or values. So what did they do to their employee? They fired him. Think about that. That is fascism. It's one individual simply expressing that all lives matter, and he loses his job. Stan Wisconowski, he was the top editor at the Philadelphia Inquirer, which itself is part and parcel to this liberal media establishment that has done so much harm to free speech. So one could say he was hoisted by his own petard, although I don't know him personally or his work personally, but just generally speaking, the positions of the Philadelphia Inquirer are obviously to the left. But in any event, he's the top editor. He's forced to resign over a headline of an architecture column. I didn't realize that architecture could be so politically explosive. But here's what the headline to the column read: "Buildings Matter Too." That's it. That's the title. Buildings matter too. Now, in the article talked about various buildings in downtown Philadelphia that had been destroyed by the rioters. What happened to this editor? Forced out of his job. A professional soccer player Alexander Katai, professional soccer player Alexander Katai, he was released by the LA Galaxy, not for anything he wrote or said, but because his wife made a critical comment, or a comment that was perceived to be critical, about Black Lives Matter on Instagram. So her husband, professional soccer player, fired. This is the fascism, the ideology of trampling free speech and towing the left-wing liberal line, or else you lose, ideology that President Trump is denouncing in his remarks. Now, we've got several callers on the line, so JC, you'll forgive me. We got a couple of Johns. Can you put the first John on? Is that John from York?
Yes.
Yes, go ahead, John.
Can you hear me? Okay.
I can.
Hey, it's nice.
You're on.
It's nice to talk to you again. Why, I just want to say I proudly say that Black Lives Matter. I think the movement basically is very good. It's not left-wing or extremist, and they're not denying that all lives matter. They're simply trying to say that Black lives are often devalued, or people of color's lives are often devalued. They're trying to put an end to police brutality. They're trying to work for equal opportunity for people of color in health care, in education, and in business, and in every area of society. I don't think that the Black Lives Matter movement is radical or left-wing or fascist. Now, there might be certain groups that are trying to make it look like that, or there might be some radical groups out there, no question. And I don't think people should be losing their jobs over their ideas unless they're blatantly racist or something like that. But I think the Black Lives Matter movement is basically okay. I think they're trying to raise, to work for equal opportunity for people of color in every area of society, to end police brutality and to end all kinds of injustices. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, but what about the leaders and founders of the Black Lives Matter movement that are self-proclaimed Marxist-Leninists?
I just don't believe that. I don't think you're lying. I just think you might be incorrect there. I don't think most of them are Marxists or Leninists. I think they're just concerned about working for equal opportunity for all people of color. I mean, none of us want to see anything that's Marxist or Leninist. I mean, when you said that Marxism and Leninism and so forth were responsible for a lot of deaths, that's true. I mean, we don't want that. But Black Lives Matter is not that. It's probably somewhat like the NAACP. Although, they're just a group of people trying to work for equal opportunity for people of color and everyone. You think I'm all wet?
Yeah, well, two of the co-founders of Black Lives Matter have described themselves as trained Marxists. So I think one could truthfully make the point that at least those who founded the organization are Marxist-Leninists, and
I just don't see that. I respectfully disagree.
Well, yeah, I mean, considering what that Marxism and Leninism have done to the world, the large scale murder that they unleashed.
That's no good. No, that's terrible.
30 million Russians, Ukrainians murdered.
And what Chairman Mao did, and some of them, that's
the
terrible.
Marxists, 50 million Chinese under Chairman Mao. Killed, murdered, starved to death under the Marxist.
Oh, it's terrible.
Policy.
It's horrible. Horrible.
How the leaders of those movements took control of their countries using guns, using bullets, and murdered.
I mean, that's horrible, but I don't see where that's any. I basically support the Black Lives Matter movement, and any group that's trying to peacefully work for equal opportunity for all people of color in every area of life. That's my message. I just don't see where they're Marxist. Like I say, I respectfully disagree.
All right. Well, you're welcome to do that. John, thanks for calling. We've got to take a brief commercial break. Take a brief commercial break. You're on the Mark Scaringi Show. Stay tuned. We'll be back right after this.
Now back to the Mark Scaringi Show on News Radio WHP 580.
And welcome back to the Mark Scaringi Show, your place on the dial for constitutional conservatism. This is the place where we talk about the important political and legal issues of the day from the perspective of putting America first. We're talking about President Trump's beautiful speech in front of the Mount Rushmore monument, in which the president spoke beautifully about the great men of American history, the father of our country, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, who wrote the Declaration of Independence, Abraham Lincoln, who freed the slaves and preserved the Union, and Theodore Roosevelt, who pretty much embodied what the American ideal is of boldness and independence and perseverance and hard work and dedication, and helped to realize America's manifest destiny, conquering the West. Just a truly a great man, and again, an embodiment of the American ideal. We are also talking about those who have criticized and condemned the president's speech. And we're getting into the president really getting into the nuts and bolts of the nitty-gritty, so to speak, of what America is confronting today with a liberal extremist ideology that is believed and espoused and promoted by so many who occupy important positions in most of the institutions that comprise the civil society of the United States of America. We are hearing from several callers, and I know there are several on the line, so hang tight. We're going to get to you in just a few seconds. We heard from our friend John from York, who does not believe that Black Lives Matter is a Marxist-Leninist organization. And I think the facts just tell a different story. Co-founder of BLM, Patrice Colliers, in a 2015 video, described herself and fellow organizers of BLM as trained Marxists. She is a protege of Eric Mann, who was a former agitator of the Weather Underground, which you may recall from the 60s, the domestic terror organization that was deeply imbued in Marxist-Leninist political revolutionary ideology. And the BLM co-founder, Patrice Collier, says in the video, the first thing I think is that we actually do have an ideological frame. Myself and Alicia, she's referring to her co-founder, Alicia Garcia, in particular, are trained organizers. We are trained Marxists. We are super versed on ideological theories. And I think that we can really try to build a movement that can be utilized by many, many black folk under the banner of Marxism and Leninism. So these are the co-founders of the BLM movement. So I think it's pretty clear that it's a Marxist-Leninist organized and led movement. But let's open up the phone lines, and we'll hear from some of our other listeners. We have John from Enola. John, you're on the Mark Scaringi Show.
Hello.
Yes,
Hello.
John, go ahead.
Can you hear?
I can.
Respectfully, I disagree with your previous caller. If you look at any of the riots, the guys waving the signs are saying Black Lives Matter as they're beating the crap out of people. Excuse my French. That is certainly not a way to protest. They've attacked veterans, senior veterans. They've attacked old women. You know, their methodology is directly from the Marxist-Leninist dogma that's been preached all over the world. I agree 100% with your comments about the dangers facing this country, and many, many people, much more educated than I am, believe that we are in our final times, that we need to turn around the country, turn around the education system, and turn around the government. So I compliment you on your efforts.
Well, thank you, John, and I think you're exactly right, and you're right to point out that we need to turn everything around. And I think we are in a cultural crisis moment in the history of our country because, if you go back to the 60s and you look at the student-led movements to oppose the war in Vietnam, and you had the countercultural revolution, the hippies, the Black Panthers, the Weather Underground, it was described as a countercultural revolution because most of the culture and most of the institutions at the time, leaned conservative and supported and espoused and promoted the traditional American ideals of what America was all about. Today, those same hippies and the Flower Children, the Black Panthers and the Weather Underground, their children, maybe some of them still, but their children, their intellectual progeny, they now control the institutions of our country. So they are leading the cultural revolution, and it's we. It's the conservative Republicans or the constitutional conservatives, or the libertarians, or just the Trump supporters, however you want to describe or define us. We are almost the countercultural individuals in today's age. It's like we're fighting against the predominant culture in our country today, which has embraced this liberal progressive ideology that has condemned all of us, except for them, of course, has condemned half of America as deplorables, has condemned American history as racist, sexist, and every phobic you can think of, has condemned the founding. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I say, and that condemnation is directly from the Democratic Party. That's been the history of their party, is to constantly besmirch the name of citizens who don't agree with them. Yeah, that's right. John, thanks for calling. I appreciate that.
We just have a few minutes left, but I think John's right on point in that those of us who believe in the principles and values of the founding fathers and the founding of our country, it's almost as if we are the counterculture today, because so many of our institutions are controlled by the liberal progressive now elite. And we were just talking about how individuals who just utter the words or tweet the words "all lives matter" are being fired. They're losing their employment. We talked about the Sacramento Kings, the play-by-play announcer. Examples even with the Philadelphia Inquirer and the New York Times, where they are firing editors who are not towing the Black Lives Matter line. That is so harmful to our country that it doesn't give one a lot of hope for the future. I think things are coming to a head here in this country. We've seen violence all throughout the streets of our major cities. We've seen mayors of major cities, the mayor of Seattle, for a couple of weeks, give up on the rule of law, on law and order, and allow a group of left-wing extremists take over public and private property in what they declare to be an autonomous zone in Seattle, in which they established a commune, essentially, a communist government and an economy where they planted vegetables in the public park, and they had these nascent dictators who were policing the streets of the autonomous zone and enacting street justice. I mean, These are prototype communist dictatorships that arose in downtown Seattle. And we had the mayor of Washington, D.C., our nation's capital, Muriel Bowser, just taunting President Trump when there were rioters in the streets of Washington, D.C., who were desecrating and defiling some of our national treasures. For one period of time, the president was in a bunker in the White House because there were so many rioters pushing on the gates at Lafayette Park, threatening the White House. They burned part of St. John's Church, which is just yards from the north lawn of the White House. And the mayor of the city of Washington, D.C. is disparaging the president, who's under assault by rioters. And they tried to take down the statue of Andrew Jackson. These are criminal acts by left-wing extremist ideologues who are not, as one caller described earlier, simply looking for equal opportunity. They're looking to tear down our country. And thankfully, we have a president in Donald J. Trump who is fighting back and pushing back. That's all the time we have today for the Mark Scarinci Show on our nation's birthday. I wish everybody a happy 4th of July.